following is based on fact, fiction, science, or otherwise. We present that which is researched and that which is believed to be accurate and true. Professor Truth, guests, and associates may not agree on all viewpoints expressed, implied, or misunderstood by the reader or listener from the content communicated in any format. The information presented is for educational and philosophical purposes only, based solely on the spiritual precepts of the King James Bible as elucidated by original language word studies and the anointing of the Holy Spirit of Jesus Christ, Father God in the flesh. Isaiah 9:6.
So there's a really alarming trend happening in the 2018 midterms. Anti-hate groups say they're seeing a surge in candidates running on an explicitly white nationalist message.
Make America great again.
It's not because we're racist, it's because we feel marginalized and we're the ones who are being oppressed.
Both of those candidates are running on the Republican ticket, but the Republican National Committee says that America has no place for white supremacy. Hallie.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Pastor Eli James here of Anglo-SaxonIsrael.com and EurofolkRadio.com. Today's subject is the identification of Zarah, Judah in the modern world, and the bulk of today's material is going to be taken from my book, The Great Impersonation, How the Antichrist Has Deceived the Whole World. And this book documents the separate lines of descent all the way from Adam and Eve, the descendants of Seth, versus the descendants of Cain as documented throughout the Bible. And of course, this is a subject that very, very few theologians ever talk about, but the Bible very clearly details the lines of descent of the house of Seth versus the house of Cain. And then later on, the house of Jacob Israel versus the house of Esau. And my book goes to great lengths to show you the differences between these people and who the Edomites are and their modern descendants known as the Jews or Edomites and Ashkenazim versus the house of Jacob Israel and the 12 tribes that descended from Jacob Israel. But we're going to start by talking about the Bible, and today's subject is going to be the identification of Zarah, Judah in the Bible. And Zarah was the brother of Pharez, both the sons of Judah and Tamar, as explained in Genesis chapter 38. The thing that we have to understand is that the Zarahites, that is, the descendants of Zarah, Judah, did not accompany the Israelites and Moses on the Exodus. They did not participate in the Exodus, and they actually migrated north of Egypt because they did not want to be slaves, and because Zarah, being the younger brother of Pharez, there was a dispute between Zarah and Pharez as to who is the older brother, who would get the double inheritance, and who would be the heir of the scepter. And so what we see is Zarah and his descendants, plus a bunch of other tribes, including the tribe of Dan, accompanied Zarah across the Mediterranean Ocean. They simply escaped from Egypt and settled in colonies in the northern part of the Mediterranean Sea, which would include the Trojans, the Romans, and many others, which I'll detail in this discussion here. But first we need to understand, and by the way, the ultimate house of Zarah, Judah, is the red hand of Ulster. The flag of Ulster is simply a red hand with a piece of twine wrapped around it, and that is actually the Scarlet Thread that we're going to read about right here in Genesis chapter 38. And it tells us, "And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned unto a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. And he took her and went in unto her, and she conceived and bare a son." And this is the story of the 3 sons of Judah by this Canaanite woman, whose name was Shua. And they were Onan, and Shelah. Now, none of these sons continued to bear Israelite offspring because this was a forbidden marriage. Judah should not have married a Canaanite woman because such marriages were forbidden. The Israelites were commanded, and this includes Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were all commanded to marry women of their own race, not of foreign races. And when Judah married the Shuaite woman of the house of Canaan, he violated Yahweh's commandments. You can go back to Deuteronomy 7, chapter 1, and read about the commands that we are not to give our sons and daughters to peoples of other races. Abraham sent to Aram to find a wife for Isaac, and her name was Rebekah. And he also sent to Aram to find wives for Jacob, and likewise, and these are the Aramites, are the descendants of Shem. They are Shemites. Okay? So, in other words, the marriages can take place under the house of Shem, and the Israelites could also marry women of Ham and Japheth because they're all descendants of Noah. So all the descendants of Noah are white people. They're also Shemites, they're Hebrews, they're Japhethites, and they're Hamites. So as long as the sons of Israel take their wives from these daughters, from the daughters of these 3 groups, the marriage is considered legal. Anything else is illegal, and because the Canaanites were the pure enemies, they were mixed race. The Canaanite people were the tribes that Yahweh God told the Israelites to exterminate and get rid of them because they're so evil. And Rebekah was extremely upset with Esau because he married 2 Hittite women, and the Hittites were of the tribes of Canaan. And Isaac and Rebekah told Jacob, "Don't you dare marry one of these Canaanite women such as your brother Esau did, or we will disinherit you also." And the story of Esau and Canaan and Jacob explains very clearly that Jacob obeyed Yahweh's laws, Esau didn't, and Jacob obeyed the marriage laws too. So his 12 sons, Judah being one of the cardinal tribes, and the cardinal tribes are defined by the way in which the Israelites encamped themselves in the desert. The cardinal tribes were on the center of one side. They camped in a square. The 3 tribes in the north, 3 in the east, 3 in the west, 3 in the south. The cardinal tribes were the ones that camped in the middle, and they were the more important or the more powerful tribes. So Judah was a cardinal tribe. So was Joseph. And so we'll bring these 2 tribes together toward the end here, because what we find is that the symbol of Judah being the lion and the symbol of Joseph being the unicorn are found in the British royal emblem. And since there were never any lions in Britain, most people wonder, well, where did this lion symbolism come from? Well, it came from the fact that the British throne is descended from the house of David through Judah. So now let's get to the Scarlet Thread. And because Er and Onan were actually killed by Yahweh so that they could not bear offspring of Tamar, and Shelah was still too young. This is where we pick up the story. Genesis chapter 38, verse 6. And Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And it tells a story of how Yahweh killed Er and Onan, leaving only Shelah. I'll just jump down to verse 11. Then said Judah to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, Remain a widow at thy father's house till Shelah my son be grown. For he said, Lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So in other words, Judah tried to marry Tamar off to his first two half-breed offspring, Er and Onan. And Yahweh would not allow this, so he killed them both. Shelah was too young and could not bear children at this young age. So he sent her away to wait for Shelah to come of age. Verse 12. And in process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. His Canaanite wife died. And Judah was comforted and went up into his sheep shearers to Timnath, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, Behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnath to shear his sheep. Verse 14, And she put her widow's garments off from her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timnath, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. Verse 15, When Judah saw her, he thought her to be an harlot, because she had covered her face. Okay, she sat by the way with her face covered, and Judah did not recognize her. Verse 16, And he turned unto her by the way, and said, Go, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee, for he knew not that this was his daughter-in-law, that he knew not that this was Tamar. And she said, What wilt thou give me that thou mayest come in unto me? And he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And she said, What wilt thou give me a pledge till thou send it? Verse 18, And he said, What pledge shall I give thee? And she said, Thy signet, thy bracelets, and thy staff that is in thine hand. And he gave it her, and came in unto her, and she conceived by him. So, Tamar, being a purebred Shemite, now was impregnated by Judah. This was a racially legal covenant, and that's a covenant when an Israelite man conceived by an Israelite woman, or by a Shemitic woman, or by an Adamic woman, that covenant is legal. So even though there was no marriage ceremony, and as a matter of fact, Judah was married to the Canaanite woman, and Shelah was actually older than Pharez and Zarah. Shelah was never considered as a descendant of Judah because he was a half-breed. Half-breeds are not permitted into the line of descent or into the congregation. They always have to remain outside of the congregation. And this is confirmed in Deuteronomy 23, verse 2, where it says, No mamzer. Your King James translates that as bastard. No bastard shall enter the house of Yahweh. However, if you look up that word bastard, it means mamzer is the Hebrew, and mamzer means a half-breed, a non-Israelite. So no mamzer can enter the house of Yahweh. And so Yahweh actually set this up because his marriage to the Canaanite woman, Shua, was illegal, and because Judah was in the wrong mindset and was actually obviously rebelling against his heritage here, Yahweh set things up so that he could bear pure race offspring, namely Pharez and Zarah. And so let's continue. So he impregnated her. Okay? And she arose and went away and laid by her veil from her and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the kid by the hand of his friend, the Adulamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand. But he found her not. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, Where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside? And they said, There was no harlot in this place. We don't know of any prostitute. Verse 22. And he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. And also the men of the place said that there was no harlot in this place. So at this point, Judah must have been thinking to himself, I've been robbed. I've been robbed. This woman tricked me, and I gave her my bracelet, my staff, and my signet, which had to have been worth a lot of money in those days, especially for a single woman who had no family, who was going to support this woman. So he must have figured, she tricked me into giving her all this valuable stuff. So it came to pass, and he could not find her, and it came to pass about 3 months after, that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, Bring her forth, and let her be burnt. So he was ready to judge her because of her trickery. Verse 25. When she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, By the man whose these are, am I with child? And she said, and of course she then displayed the signet, the bracelets, and the staff. Verse 26. And Judah acknowledged them, and said, She hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah my son, and he knew her again no more. In other words, Judah's plan was to give her to Shelah, but that never happened. He lay with her instead, and impregnated her with Pharez and Zarah. Let's continue with the story. Verse 27. And it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she travailed that the one put out his hand. All right, so the twins are getting ready to be born. One of the babies, unborn babies, put out its hand from the womb. And the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, This came out first. So here the midwife takes it upon herself to declare that the one with the scarlet thread around its wrist came out first. But here's what actually happened, verse 29. And it came to pass as he drew back his hand that, behold, his brother came out. And she said, How hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee, and therefore his name is called Pharez, which means breach in Hebrew. Verse 30, and afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zarah. So, in fact, Pharez was born first, because his whole body came out first, and then Zarah came out. And because Zarah was the twin brother of Pharez and felt himself of royal seed, as it were, just as much as his brother, Pharez, but he knew that wherever he went, that is Zarah, wherever he went, he would be playing second fiddle to his brother Pharez. Now we find that Pharez and his descendants became part of the migrating 12 tribes. They migrated with Moses across the Red Sea, through the desert. They received the Ten Commandments, but the children of Zarah did not. The fact is, they are the broken off branch spoken of by Paul in the book of Romans. In fact, Paul addressed the Roman Judahites as the broken off branch, which could be grafted back in That's the exact language in Romans. It is not the case that you can take non-Israelites and graft them into the tree of Israel. He explicitly says that they're a broken off branch and that they were to be grafted back in. This defies the universalistic language that is taught by the Judeo churches today, the churches of the modern apostasy, who do not teach the covenant message. They teach that everybody can become an Israelite by believing in Jesus. That's nonsense. The Bible teaches no such thing. So now we want to trace the Zarahites because they're not discussed in the Bible post the Egyptian captivity. So what happened to them? What happened to Zarah? The Bible clearly does not say that Zarah died out or that Zarah died. In fact, we are given the descendants of Zarah in the scriptures. So I'm going to read now from my book, The Great Impersonation, starting on page 55. Chapter 9, Israel is Lost, Part 2, The House of David. And we quote Jeremiah chapter 33. For thus saith Yahweh, David shall never want a man to sit upon the throne of the house of Israel. Thus saith Yahweh, if ye can break my covenant of the day and my covenant of the night, that there should not be day and night in their season, then may also my covenant be broken with David my servant, that he should not have a son to reign upon his throne. So Jeremiah is telling us, as long as there's day and night, there will be a descendant of David upon a throne of the earth. This is clearly what the Bible is telling us. Yet we find that the Jews do not occupy any thrones anywhere. What we do find is that the descendants of David can be found in the various dynasties of the European kings and queens, such as the British throne, the Swedish throne, Danish throne, the Russian throne, the Tsars, the Kaisers of Germany, who are all, by the way, related to each other. These people are all descended from King David. We can trace their descent directly back to King David. In fact, Queen Victoria of Britain actually understood this and had her lineage traced back to King David. So these people know that this prophecy in Jeremiah has been fulfilled in them. However, the Judeo churches do not teach anything about this. And because the Judeo-Christians, the apostate Christians, falsely believe the Jews to be the Israelites of the Bible, they have no choice but to say, okay, well, the Bible must be false. These prophecies must be false because they falsely believe the Jews to be Israel or the Jews to be Judah. And the Jews have no record of sitting on any throne anywhere. This is just one of the marks of Israel, which proves to us that the Jews cannot possibly be Israel. They are, in fact, Edomites, Canaanites, and Khazars, and have no connection with scriptural Israel, or true genetic connection, historical connection, or ethnic connection at all, or religious connection either, to the Israelites of the Bible. Their religion, Judaism, was actually created from 125 BC to about 70 AD, when the Edomites under Herod created the Pharisees and made the Pharisees the ruling sect, and these were Edomites, folks. They were not Israelites. And it was because the Pharisees were Edomites, not Israelites, that they put Jesus Christ, the direct descendant of Judah and David, on the cross and assassinated him. That's why they killed him, not for any other reason than that they were Edomites and he was an Israelite, and they had no share in the covenant of Israel in any case. So that's why they wanted to kill him. That's why they did kill him, because they had taken the nation of Judah away from the house of Judah, using the Roman army under Herod to invade Jerusalem and forcibly take the kingdom of Judah away from the Judahites and reign in the stead of the Judahites. This was Herod being the very first Edomite king to reign over the combined nation of Judah and Idumea. So let's start from page 55. For some rather astounding, not to mention exciting history, let us return for a moment to Israel's captivity in Egypt immediately before the Exodus, which is around 1486 BC. We know from 1 Chronicles 2:6 that Judah, the son of Jacob Israel, had 5 sons: Onan, Shelah, Pharez, and Zarah. The first 3, respectively, were sons by a Canaanite woman, but the latter 2 were true Israelites. Pharez, in turn, bore the sons Hezron and Hamel, and Zarah bore 5 sons: Zimri, Ethan, Heman, Calcol, and Dara. So we are given in Scripture a record of Pharez bearing Zarah bearing 5 sons: Zimri, Ethan, Heman, Calcol, and Dara. Although the Bible does not tell us the exploits of these sons of Judah, there is some secular history available to us which is pertinent to our subject. E. Raymond Capt, in his book Jacob's Pillar, informs us of the following. Quote, an examination of some of the historical clues reveals that Darda, the Egyptian son of Zarah, was Dardanus, the Egyptian founder of Troy. Now, quote-unquote Egyptian, because he was in fact an Israelite of the house of Judah who had migrated up to Troy. He's called an Egyptian because he came from Egypt. Does not mean he was racially an Egyptian. He was racially a Hebrew, a descendant of Judah and Tamar, just like his brother Pharez. So Darda, or Dara in Scripture, was the founder of Troy, Troy being therefore a Judahite enclave or a Judahite colony. Hecataeus therefore tells us that the Egyptians, formerly being troubled by calamities, in order that the divine wrath might be averted, expelled all the aliens gathered together in Egypt. Of these, some, under the leaders Danis and Cadmus, migrated to Greece. This is Fragmenta Historicum by Muller, Volume 2, pages 385, copied from the works of Hecataeus of Abdera, a 4th century BC Greek historian. So we see from the contemporary historians, or I should say later historians from Greece, from Turkey, from Rome, etc., and even from Britain, we find that we can trace the descendants of Zarah Judah. So here it says they escaped, and all we can conclude is that Zarah, and I discussed this previously, that Zarah, considering himself to be of royal blood, did not want to compete with his brother for the throne, so he left Egypt with probably some people of the tribe of Dan, and this is probably leader Danis, and others, Danis and Cadmus, so members of the tribe of Dan, migrated with Zarah Judah, and other members of the tribe of Dan stayed with, and probably Dan himself, stayed with the 12 tribes and with Pharez, from whom David descended. Now, so these aliens being discussed are in fact Israelites. Okay? There may have been other tribes of people held in captivity by the Egyptians, but we're talking here specifically about the Israelites and their exploits after being expelled or by voluntarily leaving because they did not want to be slaves of the Egyptians. They found boats and they crossed the Mediterranean and settled on the north coast of the Mediterranean. Referring to the records of the Egyptians, Diodorus has this to say about our present subject, quote, they say also that those who set forth with Danaus, likewise from Egypt, settled what is practically the oldest city in Greece, Argos. Jason and the Argonauts, folks, they were Israelites. And that the nations of the Colchi in Pontus and that of the Jews, it says here, of course that's a translated word, that is the Judahites we're talking about here. The Jews would not even consider themselves to be related to the Argonauts or the Colchi or the Trojans or the Romans, because they aren't. Therefore, this is a bad translation. It should be the Judahites, which lies between Arabia and Syria, where were founded as colonies by certain immigrants from their country. And this is the reason why it is a long-established institution among those peoples to circumcise their male children. Why? Because they were Israelites. The custom having been brought over from Egypt. Even the Athenians, they say, are colonists from Sais in Egypt. These are the words of Diodorus of Sicily, quoted by G.H. Oldfather in Volume 1, Books 1 through 2, page 91. So here we see that secular historians have traced the origin of the founders of Troy, Athens, and various other places, the Colchi and the Argonauts. So we have and we know that Rome was founded by Trojans, related to Brutus. Brutus, however, moved on and eventually settled in Caer Troy. Caer Troy later changed to the name of London. So we know that Britain, Rome, the Argonauts, the Trojans, and the Athenians, now we have documentation that all of these nations were founded by Israelites descended from Zarah, Judah, or affiliated with Zarah, Judah. Cap continues on page 24, quote, the descendants of Zarah ruled ancient Troy for some hundreds of years until the city was destroyed in the famous siege of Troy, which everybody knows about, but very few people knows that these Trojans were in fact Israelites of Zarah, Judah. Aeneas, the last of the royal bloodline of Zarah, Judah, collected the remnants of his nation and traveled with them to Italy. There he married the daughter of Latinus, the king of the Latins, and subsequently founded the great Roman Empire. So you see that the Roman Empire was also founded by Israelites, Judahites, of the house of Zarah, Judah. Now it's quite possible here that the Latins, that King Latinus was a Japhethite, because we know that the descendants of Japheth settled in this area long before any Israelites got there. So we can say that both the Greeks and the Latins, their origin was in Japheth. However, when the Israelites migrated over to Greek and Latin territory, they conquered that territory and became the rulers over the Japhethites, which is a fulfillment of the prophecy way back in Genesis 6 and 7 that says that Japheth shall dwell in the tents of Shem. In other words, the Shemites would rule over and build the civilizations in which the Japhethites dwell, okay? So, and that even includes Russia, because we find that the Tsars of Russia, being descendants of David and therefore Shemites, ruled over a vast Slavic nation, namely Russia, the Slavs being descendants of Japheth. So we see the Bible is true, every man's a liar, and if you understand history, you can see all these prophecies being fulfilled in our ancestors. So, we see that Darda founded Rome. Aeneas' son or grandson Brutus, with a large party of Trojans, migrated to Malta, and there was advised to reestablish his people in the Great White Island, an early name for Britain due to its chalk cliffs, the White Cliffs of Dover. This advice is recorded in an archaic Greek form on the Temple of Diana in Caer Troy, which is New Troy. A historic stone still stands in the town of Totnes on the shores of Tor Bay, commemorating his coming, circa 1103 BC. Brutus then made contact with his kindred blood in Britain and built for himself a new capital city, to which he gave the name Caer Troia or New Troy. The Romans later called it Londinium now known as London. So we can see that the British Empire, namely beginning with England, of course, was actually founded by an Israelite descendant of Zarah, Judah. Quoting from a book of Welsh bardic literature, the Welsh Brutes, Cap relates the story of the founding of the city of London. The text states, quote, "At this time, Eli the priest ruled in Judea, and the Ark of the Covenant was in captivity to the Philistines." Cap equates Eli with Eli of 1 Samuel 1, or 1 Samuel. This seems reasonable. After all, you might say, what did the early Britons know of or care about the Ark of the Covenant? The ancient literature, when thoroughly perused, reveals that the founders of Britain were well aware of their Israelite heritage and kept in touch with it even down to the days of Paul and after. In fact, it's quite possible and likely that Joshua also made a trip to Britain, because Joshua was a builder of hedges, and it's also quite possible that Joshua was responsible for building Stonehenge. Only with the beginning of the Dark Ages was this heritage, the knowledge of the British people of their Israelite heritage. Only with the beginning of the Dark Ages, and this is where the Catholics invaded Britain and replaced Celtic Zarah Judah heritage with Catholic heritage, but with the Catholic Church actually being the Antichrist church of its time. Having nothing to do with the covenant people, the Catholic Church is a Laodicean church, a church which imposes itself by force upon the Christian people. As you all know, the history of the Catholic Church is one of great, great violence and conquering by the sword and converting by the sword. Catholic churches claim to being the true descendant of Peter and the Israelites of the Bible is totally bogus. There is no line of descent from the popes through Peter to the popes, none whatsoever. If by chance a Roman citizen became a pope and he were accidentally a descendant of Zarah Judah, then he could claim a relationship to Peter, but there is no demonstrable line of descent from Peter to any pope. That is a false claim made by the Catholic Church. So this knowledge was finally completely lost, and in fact, any attempt to regain this knowledge is dramatically opposed by the Catholic Church, by the Anglican Church, by the Protestant churches, by the Jews, you name it. Anybody who delves into this history to explain the true origin of the Israelite people in the world today, namely the Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, and Caucasian people, this is condemned as heresy by the heretics themselves. We are teaching true history, we are teaching true scripture, and no one can contradict our teaching because we have the facts, and they don't dare to debate us over these facts. This is exactly what's going on. That's why Christianity is hated all over the world, because we teach the truth that oppose their lies. So what we are doing here is tracing migrations of Hebrews and Israelites previous to the days of captivity. And of course, the Israelites of Pharez, Judah, were captive to the Babylonians, and the Israelites of the 10 northern tribes became captive to the Assyrians. So our ancestors were enslaved on 3 separate occasions. And the Jews never really talk about this either. The Jews actually have even if the Jews were descended from the house of Judah, which they are not, they would have no connection whatsoever to the Assyrian captivity of the 10 northern tribes, which were not related to the tribe of Judah. Tribe of Judah and tribe of Benjamin were the house of Judah, and the 10 northern tribes were the house of Israel. So those 2 houses have separate destinies. However, they were to be remerged much later on, actually, with the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, when both the house of Israel and the house of Judah were redeemed at the cross. So let's continue. What we find is that the Israelites have, by the time of the captivities, 721 to 587 BC, settled the whole of the Mediterranean and founded one civilization, Greece, and were founding another, Rome, and they had actually established Troy, and the Peloponnesus, I forget how you pronounce it, and several other smaller civilizations in the territory we now today call Italy, Greece, Serbia, Western Anatolia, which is known as Turkey today. And in fact, Western Anatolia is where Paul grew up, and he tells us he is an Israelite of the tribe of Benjamin. Peloponnesus is the correct pronunciation, and etc. So we find when we trace the historical records that Zarah, Judah, was the founder of all of these greater and lesser civilizations of the northern Mediterranean. And, quoting Cap once more, historical records tell of the westward migration of the descendants of Calcol along the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, establishing Iberian, that is, Hebrew, trading settlements. One settlement, now called Saragossa, in the Ebro Valley in Spain, was originally known as Saragossa, meaning the stronghold of Zarah. From Spain, they continued westward as far as Ireland. And now we're getting Ireland, the Red Hand of Ulster, because Zarah Judah sailed to Ireland. His descendants sailed to Ireland, bearing with them the tradition of the Scarlet Thread. The Iberians gave their name to Ireland, calling the island Iberne, which was later abbreviated to Ern, and subsequently Latinized to Hibernia, a name that still adheres to Ireland itself. So by tracing these ancient records, we find that in fact Ireland was founded by Zarah, Judah. Sheldon Emery, in his book Paul and Joseph of Arimathea, Missionaries to the Nations, tells us this about the same period. Quote, maps of Europe show Spain and Portugal on the Iberian Peninsula, what we know as the Peninsula of Spain. Any language teacher will tell you that Iberia means land of the Hebrews. Also, the Spanish river Ebro is derived from Eber, the grandson the grandsire of the Hebrews, the original Hebrew, Eber. The river Guadalquivir was originally Wadi al-Hibiri, which in Moorish means the river of the Hebrews. The modern Spanish city of Cadiz was originally Gadaria, or city of Gad. It was named when men of the tribes of Gad and Dan worked the mines in Iberia during the reign of King Solomon in Israel 1,000 years before Paul came to Spain. I hope you're getting the picture here, folks. We are verifying the fact that Europe, the western islands and the western shores of Europe, including Spain and the northern shores of the Mediterranean, all of these civilizations were founded by Zarah, Judah, and other Israelites as well. There's an ancient tombstone in Sagunto, Spain, with this epitaph in Hebrew. In Hebrew, folks, this is the tomb of Adoniram, an officer of King Solomon, who came to collect tribute and died in the day. And they couldn't tell us the day because that was scratched out. See 1 Kings 12:13 to find mention of one Adoram. If Adoram and Adoniram are one and the same, then we have evidence that Solomon's kingdom was quite extensive. We know that Solomon sent ships out all over the world. We know that Solomon's ships actually came to America, and they sailed up the St. Lawrence River, and they mined copper and other ores in Michigan, and as far down as Illinois, and also in Minnesota. They left these inscriptions here in America, proving that they were here, because these scripts were unintelligible to linguists and archaeologists until recently, when they discovered they are indeed related to Hebrew, and nobody could have faked these inscriptions because nobody was even aware that these inscriptions were related to Hebrew. We are aware of these things today. And he continues, Shelton Emery continues, from Spain, these seafaring Danites, Gadites, and other Israelites, both before and after the time of Solomon, sailed up the west coast of France and to the Isles of the Sea, Ireland, and England. Ireland is actually the modern English spelling of the island's ancient name of Hibernia, or again, Hebrews' land. Irish chroniclers writing of the origin of their people trace them back to Spain, the Milesians of the Mediterranean islands, and the Danans. The Danans are identified as the tribe of Dan, and the Milesians can be traced back to the south of the Caucasus Mountains, the area we now know of as the location of the Assyrian captivity and of the 10-tribed house of Israel. So we see that the 10-tribed house of Israel and the 2-tribed house of Judah merged together to migrate west and founded Ireland, England, France, Spain, ultimately founded Germany, but that was an overland migration, not totally associated with the migrations we're speaking of here. So the Danans are identified as the tribe of Dan, and the area that we now know as the location of the Assyrian captivity, the 10-tribed house of Israel, is the source of the Milesians. It is significant the Irish historians show that 2 of the sons of the first Milesian king to set foot on Ireland were named Heber the Fair and Heber the Brown. Howard B. Rand, in his pamphlet, David's Greater Son, says of the Milesians, thus, from Zarah's line came the progenitors of the Milesian civilization that was established around the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. However, although they were descendants of Judah, they were not Jews. Well said, Mr. Rand. They were indeed not Jews, because the Jews do not identify themselves with any of the migrations except their own expulsion from Palestine by the Romans. By the way, the Romans were descended from Zarah, Judah, and Paul predicts in Romans 16:20 that the Jews would be expelled by the Romans. Romans 16:20. Professor Totten, in his compilation entitled Our Race Series, tells us this: for if Zarah, the Egyptian, son of Zarah, was Dardanus, the Egyptian founder of Troy, and Calcol was the Egyptian Cecrops, or Nile, and the contemporary founder of Athens and Thebes, and if Heman, the brother of Nile, was likewise the contemporary Egyptian Aganon, or as we know him, Agamemnon, who inherited Phoenicia, and if Mahol, son of Zarah, and the father of these famous Egyptians was Sitha, or Phoenicia Pharez, the Egyptian ancestor of the Milesians, whose records, full and complete, enable us to blend the whole into one continuous recital down to the present day. Surely we have means at hand in the Trojan, Grecian, and Milesian sources to continue out the record of the sacred chronicles and lend them greater reverence as we come to understand and prize them at their worth. That's Professor Totten, Our Race Series, Volume 4, page 165. Let me make a couple more quotes before wrapping this up, because I've got tons of material here to prove that the European nation states were founded by Israelites, and that our kings and queens were in fact descendants of both the house of Zarah and the house of Pharez, both the 2 sons of Judah through Tamar. In Jacob's Pillar, Ray Capp summarizes the migratory situation for our clear understanding of who is who, stating that the Dedanan were the first to arrive in Ireland. This is the tribe of Dan. The Milesians arrived next around 1000 BC, invading and subjugating the Dedanan. Both the Dedanan and the Milesians were kinsmen, who long ages before had separated from the main Hebrew stem. Many historians today erroneously refer to these people as Celts and Gaels, whereas in fact they were only forerunners of the Celtic tribes that wound their several ways across Europe from the east, turbulently meeting and finally blending in amity and flowing onward in one great Gaelic stream into the islands of Britain. Again, Howard B. Rand in the Covenant People states, there is evidence that the Spartans were Israelites. Their land, Lacedaemon, called also laconi, from which we get the word laconic for short and sharp speech, which is Hebrew speech, very short, brief, simple declarative sentences, which Paul lacked because he grew up learning Greek rhetoric with multiple clauses, if, ands, and buts in all the sentences, not the short, sharp speech of the Hebrews. The proverbial speech of Israel, and themselves called of old Lacedaemonians, are directly connected with Israel by two letters found in the first book of Maccabees, found in the Apocrypha. When the Judahites, under Maccabees, sent to ask the protection of Rome, their embassy called at Greece with letters to the Lacedaemonians. This is what the high priest wrote to those Grecians. Quote, Grecians, there were letters sent in times past to Onias, the high priest, for Darius, who reigned then among you, to signify that ye are our brethren, ye are our kinsmen. The Lacedaemonians are the kinsmen of the Judahites of Maccabees, which is, of course, the Apocrypha. And the original King James 1611 Bible did contain the Apocrypha, did contain First Maccabees and Second Maccabees. It's only in recent history, in the mid-1750s, that the Apocrypha were removed from the King James Version. He enclosed a copy of that earlier letter, which read, Arius, king of the Lacedaemonians, to Onias the high priest, greetings. It is found in writing that the Lacedaemonians and the Judahites are brethren, and that they are of the stock of Abraham. So you can see, ladies and gentlemen, that you have been told false history. The fact is that the Irish, the British, the original Spanish, even the original Portuguese, the Hollanders, who were descended from the tribe of Zebulun, the Finns, who are descended from the tribe of Issachar, the Germans, who are descended from Pharez, Judah, the Greeks, the Romans, the Lacedaemonians, the Spartans, the Trojans, all of these people are directly descended from the 12 tribes of Israel and have been led throughout history by the kings and queens of either Zarah, Judah, or Pharez, Judah. We can document this unequivocally, and we have done so, and have done so in this book, The Great Impersonation, How the Antichrist Has Deceived the Whole World, by yours truly, Pastor Eli James. And what I have also done, to remind you, is that in this book I have documented the line of descent of Cain from Genesis 4 and of Seth from Genesis 5, and trace their separate and distinct lines of descent throughout history to the present day, showing that number one, people are descended from the line of Cain through Esau, who married into the Canaanites. Then the Edomites, who were a branch of the Canaanites, who lived in the land of Idumea, just south of Judah. When those two nations were merged together under King John Hyrcanus, which was a violation of the law, something he was forbidden to do by Yahweh's law, he did it anyway. In other words, he invited Edomites into his country. These Edomites pursued a strategy of infiltration and subversion and sabotage. And as I said earlier, Herod and the Roman army invaded the city of Jerusalem, and it was the Roman army that installed Herod by force. Herod was not an Israelite. He was not a line of descent of Pharez, Judah at all. He was an invader. He was a complete outsider. He was, in fact, an Edomite. And Herod the Edomite established the Pharisees, the Edomites and the Pharisees, in rulership over the true Judahites of Judea. And this is how the Jews began. They did not begin in ancient Israel in the Old Testament. They began actually in apocryphal times, in the days between the Old Testament and the New Testament. This is why the book of Matthew opens up with the line of descent of Jesus Christ, demonstrating that he is a descendant of Judah and David. That's why that record is in there, to prove to you that Jesus was an Israelite, 100% purebred of the tribe of Judah. And also the book of Luke in chapter 3, that's why that genealogy is contained in there as well. All of these lines of descent are of extreme importance. Once you trace these lines of descent, then you can understand that Jesus Christ was a 100% pure Judahite through David. He had no mixed blood in him whatsoever, could not have had mixed blood, otherwise the prophecies of the covenant people could not have been fulfilled. The notion by the Judeo churches, the apostate churches of heresy, that anybody can become an Israelite by conversion, that's a lie. The Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 through 37, plainly state that the new covenant will be between the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Read it for yourself. These are the facts. This is true history. This is true Bible scholarship, the like of which you will not get from any heretical Judeo-Christian denomination. You will only get this from identity. We teach the covenant message, not the universalism and the heresies of the modernist churches. Thanks for listening. We're going to do part 2 of this study later on. We'll be tracing the history of Pharez Judah and the kings and queens of Europe, and how all the kings and queens of Europe have descended from either Pharez Judah or Zarah Judah, or as descendants of both, because there were 2 occasions in history in which the Zarah line and the Pharez line married back into each other, thus producing a line of Judah. Then from that point on, it doesn't matter whether it's Zarah or Pharez, because they married back into each other. And we will talk about that in part 2 of the study, which will be called Identifying Pharez Judah.